So folks, thank you so much for having me. I have to explain, when Sherry reached out to me and said, we want you to talk to Wireshark, I'm like, do you have the right person? She said, it's Jasper's fault. So you can blame Jasper if you don't like this. Mind you, there are a couple of people here who've actually seen me before and have come back. So they're gluttons for punishment. So I'm looking at them and I've assigned them the task of actually telling me if I've gone off track. All right, so there's a whole bunch of stuff here about who I am and what I've done. The key thing for the Cisco hardware stuff is I helped build the Catalyst 3850 and the Catalyst 9K. And I've actually got to the point in the job where my job description really doesn't apply and I get to go and do stuff I care about, which is really good. And I like having stuff that's actually usable and I like helping people grow. So what do I fit in at Cisco? That's me. Distinguished engineer is the second top rank. Fellow is the top technical rank. We have about 400-ish, maybe distinguished engineers and 25 fellows. So my boss, who I've known for a long time, he builds all of the hardware for enterprise switching, data center switching, and all of our IoT networking. So it's a pretty big portfolio, but we don't have profit and loss, so we're a cost center. So we report up into a guy called Marco Croci. Marco is actually based in Italy. So he has all of the enterprise stuff plus SP plus some optics. He reports up into G2 and he reports up into Chuck. So that is my layers of things. David's in Austin, Marco's in Italy, G2's in San Jose. I think Chuck is somewhere in Raleigh, maybe, I don't know. All right, so where did I start? I come from Western Australia. There's a picture over there. For those who don't know, Australia is the size of the US with about 28 million people. There are more people in Shanghai. The western third of the country is one state. So think about everything west of the Rockies, minus Utah, with 2.5 million people and 2 million in one city. So we have a lot of desert. So that's actually the primary school I went to. Went to a normal high school. Again, it's still in Perth. Then my dad basically got moved up into the country, so I moved halfway up the coast. So I spent grades 10, 11, 12 in a high school that had an interesting combination of more working class people and also a bunch of Indigenous kids from the local camps. And so it was a very different experience. I finished that. I wanted to go do physics at university. My dad did physics. I love physics because there's only sort of 3 or 4 things to remember. You can work it all out, whereas chemistry, there's too much. And so I just got physics. It was one of those things. And that's the university. It's a nice university. I did a computer science degree with a physics minor. Because I started doing physics, I worked out those people who were getting 95% would get the physics jobs, those 75% not so much. And this new thing called computer science seemed like a cool idea. But I kept going with physics. I love quantum mechanics. I hate transmission line theory. And for geekiness, my astrophysics professor was one of the people who did gravity wave detection. So they invented a ruby laser for a timer and a humongous no-beam bar. Okay, work. So not very well planned. I finished my exams, slept for a couple of weeks, and it's like, I guess I should get a job. So does anyone remember using these guys? 85? Yes. Yes, all the grey heads are up. I did a bunch of work on minis. My first programming job I got paid for was an IBM System 34, and I ran RPG2, which was truly revolting. And you're nodding. My co-worker implemented recursion in RPG, which is really sketchy. Okay, so WA is one major city. It's farming, it's mining. We have everything you can dig out of the ground. So a career job is get a programming job, keep working, rinse and repeat, and retire. Okay, so this is a pretty straight road in theory, right? I'm just thinking it will be normal, nothing much will happen. All right, so my first job out of college was at a mine site. This is iron ore, Hammersley Iron. The year I was shipped there, they shipped 100 millionth ton of iron ore. So it's an awful big hole in the ground. The colours are great. So the colours in that area are wonderful. It's actually subtropical, so it actually had a dry season and a wet season. And it was nothing like where I was used to living. So the comms was almost all RS-232. And so we had an HP 3000. And you can see it was 1 million instructions per second. And pricing started about 225K. So that was the main computer we run most of our systems on. We also had a HP 1000, a few other bits and pieces. But yeah, we ran database systems, everything else. The hard drive was about yay big. So it's a very different world. So we also had a bunch of people who were doing geology work and flooding the mines. So this is one of the tectonics things they had. Again, it was basically built in through RS-232. It was a vector graphics system, which is sort of interesting because it basically stored vectors, not points. And look at the addressable points. It's almost like 4K by 4K. It was a wonderful thing. So this was what people would do local processing on, where they want to basically, the geologists would go out and they would basically drill, then they'd figure out where the deposit went, so they would mine there, because then they would have to design the blast things, etc., etc., etc. This is one thing I used a lot. It's an HP 150. An HP 150 was an early computer and actually had a touchscreen on it. So we actually used this. We converted a control plant for a crushing plant from recording everything on a piece of paper this big to actually pushing stuff on a touchscreen, which was pretty exciting because this was running in a control facility full of very fine iron ore dust. And we had to educate the people whose main job was to keep it working how to use one of these things. And this was where I actually had to learn to talk to people because I had to negotiate with the unions, a unionised site. I wasn't really supposed to carry tools, but you had to make it work. And so anyone who's been on a mine site, as staff, you get a new white hat, and the white hat says you're staff. And so what you do immediately is you put stickers on and you throw it on the ground because you do not want to look like you've got the brand new one. So, I mean, the whole effort of doing this was exciting because we had to really change the way people did things. They were very suspicious initially, and we tended to go through keyboards for a lot, but it fundamentally worked. We transitioned them. Again, this is a touchscreen in 86. That was sort of cool. All right, anyone seen one of these? So this was my debugging tools. Or you're looking at serial and it's like, okay, what are the signals running? I don't think I ever had actually a monitor of the traffic here, but it's just you're checking connectivity. And so this is a bunch of RS-232 lines, it's a bunch of multiplexers. They're running through industrial systems. Often the equipment wasn't built to be in industrial systems, and so you run into lots of interesting problems. But this is what you carry around with you to try and figure out what you've done. All right, because if the signals aren't right, then you lost. But I don't think I ever actually had a serial data analyzer. I just had one of these. I will send out all the slides. All the links are live, and so you can see where I got this stuff from. Okay, so I was up there for a couple of years, and then they tried to promote me, and they wanted to have me in charge of the telephone operators and the PBX. And I thought, this is not me, so I said no, and I left. I went back to Perth, so that's my hometown. It's a very nice place, but it's a long way from anywhere. And I wandered around for a while, and then I got a job at a clothing store. So think about the gap. So there were about 150 stores at one stage. And interestingly enough, they had a Playboy founder. So you've heard about the bunga bunga parties in Italy? It's sort of like that. So we eventually end up failing. So it was a jeans store. So my branches are run by people who run clothing stores. So this was also interesting. We were actually using early PCs as cash registers. So this is not a picture of the actual one because I couldn't find it, but it's something close to it. Basically, it was attached to a modem and a cash register and a printer. And so all the sales went through it. It had you can see 2 floppy drives. One was for the program, one was for the data. End of every week, they summed up the figures and transmitted them. And when it went wrong, I got paged. So I think the most difficult thing I remember doing was talking the store manager through using the disk editor to fix the file system on the weekend. Because what else could you do? And that's, the first bit of working in the mine site and doing this gave me the ability to speak to more people because I had to learn. And just saying, you're a store manager, you can't help, like, what am I going to do? She's in Queensland. And so, it's one thing to have the sales recording tracking because they could write out manual, but if they can't transmit the figures, life is bad. Okay, so then I was only at Jeans West for 6 to 7 months because I decided I really hated the group. I resigned and then I did nothing for a while. I actually went diving in Queensland, and then I figured out that the guy I was sharing a house with, we were both broke, so I moved out in with a friend, and then I got a job because I was running out of money. And that's how I got into networking with a company called Computer Protocol. So they did a bunch of things, but one of the primary things was VT100 or anything. So an M24, that was our development system. We had 20 meg hard drives, 10 meg for DOS, and 10 meg for Idris, which is a Unix lookalike. And the Idris was the development system. The hardware platform was a bunch of 68K boards and a multi-bus chassis. And really, we did a bunch of serial port pass-through. So we do HDLC extension, SDLC, yada, yada, yada. The thing I tended to work on was you can have a VT100, and most people have probably never seen a VT100, but that's what they actually look like. Talk to any other system. So they could talk to a Burry, they could talk to Sperry's, they could talk to an HP. That was our gig. So we wrote terminal emulators. And I actually worked on the TD830 emulator. And I think at one stage I got sent to New Zealand, and I sat for a week in an office in Wellington, which is very windy, to try and make sure it worked. And so the way we tended to do this is you just basically, you get the manual and you say, okay, what are the control characters? You map them to VT100 and try and make sure they were right. But I never saw a Burroughs terminal. So I'd been doing that software maintenance for a year, and then we had an American adventure going. So we had a sales guy and support guy in America because the founder thought we could break America. And I got asked to go. And so I came home to my girlfriend, who I'd been with for about 4 months, and said, work wants to send me to America. You want to come? Now, it got complicated. She said yes, had to get a visa, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I spent basically a year in Nashville and then Boston. So I was in Nashville, I think, for 4 months or so. And then my company bought a company in Boston. Now, that company, Appletech, actually became the basis of cable modems, which is another long story. And so I got to do pre and post sales support. So I got to carry around a compact luggable, an HP data analyzer, and a suit pack, and wander around the country doing stuff. So I worked in the Pentagon, basically in a room that looked out over the Pentagon-shaped park in the middle, which they call Ground Zero. Thank you very much. Who was that? Okay, Catch. That's an ASIC from the line card of a 9400. Longer story, but he came up with an answer. I helped build that. I worked on a Navy Regional Data Automation Center in Jacksonville, and I also worked on Barksdale Air Force Base. So I got most of the branches, didn't get the Marines. I worked in Alaska, a bunch of other places. Again, this was going around. Now, the time difference helped me because I could figure out what the problem was, give it to Australian office and get an answer back in the morning. But what you tended to find is the Americans, for instance, at the NARDAC, there was the Burroughs people, the Sperry people, and HP people, and they couldn't talk to each other. So I ended up communicating between them. And then I moved to Boston, very different experience. One of the times I went into Boston, it was the first time I'd seen snow. I was actually driving from my house down to the airport to go and see my girlfriend on Thanksgiving. And I used to live up in Reading. And so there was 2 tire tracks. And so I just followed them. As I was going into Logan, the taxi in front of me did a skid. So it was... All right, so what did I carry? I carried a 4952A. For those who are interested, there's one sitting there inside the developer den. I bought it off eBay as a demonstration. It actually works. You can program it. So I'd encourage you people to go and take a look at what the history of these things is. It's a very cool thing. So if I was plugging into something like an HDLC link or something else, I can go do that. Now, a friend of mine, when he was working there, he was working the arsenal in Radford, Virginia. And when he was leaving, the security guy wanted to smash the hard disk on his computer, but ignoring the fact that it actually tracked all the data on this thing anyway. Okay, so I was there for a year. My company had bought a company in America. That fell apart because the minority shareholder, yada. So I came back and I moved into software development, which is where I sort of stayed. That's the technology park. It's right next to the university. All right, so I started in development. So I did a bunch of stuff. Who knows what CLNP or CLNS is? Okay, so this is when gossip and OSI was a really big thing. So I wrote CLNS ESIS, which is the discovery protocol. I ported in a network routing stack. And the network routing stack was horrible because it ended up in an when we ran through a throughput test, it was just sitting in a tight loop. So I put it through a throughput test and my box was eventually Watchdog. It was revolting code. They also, at the time, screens were only 80 characters wide, and these guys wrote their code 150 characters wide. It was just miserable. I put in ISIS. That was a much better code stack. I wrote PPP load balancing over ISDN basic rate. And load balance is actually surprisingly easy, because all you do is you send the packet down, and you choose which link to go based on the total number of bytes, and the other end you resequence it. It's a simple thing. So I mean, this is the OSI stack layer. We've got CLNP. Did anyone work with NetWare? Yes. All right. So NetWare was early, and at this stage, everyone was doing their own versions of ISIS. So ISIS is the link state protocol. So DEC had one, Novell had one, and we had to port them all in. Because at this stage, there wasn't any winners out there in the market, and everyone had everything, including ArcNet, Banyan Vines. Okay, so going back in time, this is the sniffer. Who's had one of these? So this is sort of the starting point. And it came in a luggable. And this is, by the way, some of this stuff is courtesy of Gemini. I was looking through this. They claim the 3-pane window layout, which they claim, and this again, this is from Gemini. It's the current layout. I'm assuming this is still correct. So it's sort of interesting to think about. The basic user interface is carrying forward from the first person who ever did one. So there's absolutely some truth to he who has the pen makes the rules. Okay, anyone use this one, the DA30? This was the luxury car. You could basically hook it onto 2 LAN ports, and it could timestamp it for you. So this was sniffer, sort of cool. DA30, really cool. I think we had one in our company, and it was an awesome device. It could do a whole bunch of stuff, ATM, etc. But we mostly use it for LAN stuff. Or you could also use it for instance, we did a LAN bridge from ISDN. From Ethernet to ISDN primary rate, and you could basically look through the packets and see when it showed up and correlate all that stuff. It was a wonderful thing. So that company, it went forwarding along. We built small routers. At the time, our parent company was the primary Cisco importer in Australia, so trying to sell routers against Cisco didn't work out too well. So eventually they decided they were going to close our section and basically integrate us into the rest. Wanted me to move to Melbourne, and I said no. So I basically moved across the road to a group called ATRI. ATRI was the Australian Telecommunications Research Institute. They were a technology commercialisation group associated with the university. All right, does anyone remember 802.6, DQDB or SMDS? Nope. All right, so it was an early standard. It was a metro ring. It actually came out of Western Australia, and so the company formed a company called QPSX to drive it. When QPSX finished, a bunch of those original inventors, professors, they went off to found this telecommunications group. And when I was there, we were basically building the technology to spin out another company. The company became Atmosphere Networks. It was actually running voice, video, data over a metro area ring with ATM cells. It was called Atmosphere because there's not that many words in the English language that start with ATM. And we were in the whole set of people in sort of 95 through 2000 who were building this stuff. Technology was pretty good. It got sold for bones. It got sold to a company called Ditech. Ditech wanted to take our software, which is built for quite a small system, and make a million port optical cross connect. So it was like not really a good investment. So luckily enough, I had chosen not to go with them. But at that stage, my wife wasn't working. She's a recovering lawyer. My kids went into school, so it was like we could go to America for a while. At that stage, you know, this is 2000, 2001, Silicon Valley is hiring anyone who could walk or talk. You know, because one of the ways you value startups was how many engineers they had on staff and how many patents they filed. So Silicon Valley in general has a big problem with using activity as a measure for achievement, and it's not. And I've shown some of you people the classic Dilbert, which is the boss comes and says, we're going to do a reward, $10 for every bug. And Wally says, I'm going to write me a minivan this afternoon. So you got to really think about how you do rewards. Anyway, so back in the Atmosphere days, I was having trouble finding the ATM tools I might use, because I sort of forget. But this is one of the early ones that was sort of around there. because I actually went back to working not so much on the ATM side of it, but on the front end side. So I worked on T1, E1, I worked on OC3, SDS stuff. So if you go back in that time, one of the things I actually had was there's a document called ANSI T1.231, which defined how you did monitoring and error stats and promotion of errors to alarms, etc. It was actually a very good structured document. But if you wanted to deal with this, you'd be carrying something like this. And at this stage, the devices are really getting more like a computer with extra stuff added. And so as you see, you get T1, E1, ISDN, Ethernet, FDDI, yada, yada, yada. So Atmosphere finished and I came to the States. What I'd actually done was I came over and I shot myself around in Silicon Valley for about 3 weeks, got some job offers, went back to Australia, made a choice and waited for a visa. Now, in that first period, my wife and I got married because we had about 3 weeks to do it. Otherwise, she couldn't get into the country because my kids could, but we actually had to be spouses, right? Joined by mortgage and kids wasn't enough. So it's like, okay, we're going to so we had a wedding and a restaurant. We had a jester, a childminder, and a band. What
was the restaurant?
The restaurant, this is in Fremantle, and I'll show you the pictures later. So Fremantle is a port in Perth. It goes out over the river. It was a July day, but the weather was great. And we actually had hired a vintage car. So when the vintage car came in, it had a stroller on the back. And when I walked down the aisle, I was carrying my son. So this was all prep. So basically, we were waiting for a visa to come through. That came through in January, and I moved to Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley is a very great cultural shock in a lot of ways. One of them is housing prices. So we had to get used to looking at it and going, okay, doesn't matter. So we bought a house end of February, and the bum dropped out of the market in March. So on an H1, you have about 2 weeks officially to find another job. So being on a mortgage with 2 kids, wife who couldn't work and working for a startup, yeah, that was pretty challenging. And because you're on H1B, you had to put down 25%. So because I put down 25%, I never went underwater, but that was a really stressful time. So I was with that startup that actually worked out being a good choice because they survived long enough for me to get my green card before they hit the ground. So I knew they were going to hit the ground, and so I actually bailed out just before Christmas, and they closed their doors just after Christmas. So this was another group that was doing stat maxing over rings. And so this is when you started seeing the lane testers first show up. So again, doing some research. Thank you, Gemini. So it's the first time we really got something that was doing active testing. Anyone use one of these? Perfect. Come and get one of these. Sorry, I can't throw it quite that far. I'm tempted.
I used a lot of those, actually.
Okay, so Smart Bits thing became really cool because you actually start doing active testing. So at that company, I was at that stage, I was writing microcode for the MSC network processor. It had this interesting flaw that it prioritized ingress traffic over egress. And the way you managed them was you sent them egress packets. So if it got really busy and you hadn't done your work properly, they would become unmanageable. So it was a delicate device to play with. Around this time, you saw the Ixia. Same thing. Who's used one of these? You don't count. You don't count. Jasper, can you deliver for me? And so this was the things that started to come through. And so from a testing point of view, this is wonderful. So when I was writing my code, I could generate exactly what I needed. I could generate the packet size, all that stuff. And this is where I figured out that people run these tests, and what they expect to do is they want to forward 100% line rate traffic for like a few hours and not drop anything. Now, strictly speaking, if that works, you've violated the standard. Because Ethernet is asynchronous, and you have a plus or minus 100 ppm clock. So you can't actually run full duplex both directions, because you'll eventually drop something. So the way the vendors get around this is we just reduce the size of the IPG we send in on the output. Now, of course, if everyone does this, it breaks. But to pass the test that makes no sense, you actually do things which violate the standard. This is actually pretty common. All right, so my startup, was going to hit the ground. This was very clear. They actually got to the stage where they took on venture debt, and then within a month, the venture debt went back to the venture debt company because I think we violated the debt covenants. So at this stage, I really decided that I was done. So the tooling kit around here is the XM2. So the tooling is getting more and more complex and expensive. And this is where things like Wireshark and the reverse of Wireshark, whose name escapes me, becomes really interesting. Because now you democratize both packet capture and packet transmission. And the fact you could write your own dissectors means you can actually start doing really interesting things. But this was the cool stuff. So we had a whole bunch of this because we're doing things at line rate all over the place. Someone saw it at Cisco. So this is actually me in 2005. It's when I'm about to join. You can see at that stage I still had black in the hair, but I had a bit of grey in the beard. And I actually have had a beard since Christmas 1989. I've not been clean shaven since then because I really hate shaving. And so having gone through startup life, which is very much about showing activity, there was something missing for me because everything I built disappeared. So it's like the sandcastles thing where you put your life and soul into something and it goes away and then you go and do it again somewhere else. And so for me, that just wasn't enough. So I made a really big decision. I joined the Borg. So this is one of the early AI ones, is like, please show me as a Borg. So the thing about Cisco was it was known for acquiring everyone. Now, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I ended up in the group that made Catalyst 2K, 3K, which is the perfect place for me because that stuff gets consumed. So I assume most people know what a Catalyst 3850 is and Cat 9K. So I worked on that project. So mid-2006, I started on the program. At that stage, they had an initial architecture spec for the ASIC. I was assigned to put together the software architecture. And at that stage, I ran into one of the classic Silicon Valley, Cisco versus Australian points of view. So I'd set up for a meeting with a whole bunch of people writing chapters. I would run the meeting on my agenda and I would be done. When someone tried to go and take the meeting offline, I was like, you can go and have your own meeting. See you later. So in Silicon Valley, everyone wants to take over the meeting. Everyone wants to be a king. So I got known as a meeting Nazi. But that's just the way I ran meetings. So shortly afterwards, we sort of reviewed what everyone was doing. And myself and my colleague, basically, he went and did more of the software because he'd been there a long time. And I focused on the ASIC architecture. So I was the software interface to the ASIC group. So the reference spec that we wrote for Doppler originally was about 1,500 pages of text and about 15,000 registers of memories. I went through that 1,500 pages of text probably 10 times. I ran the software review. I wrote parts of it because I was deeply involved in both the stacking protocol and NetFlow and a bunch of other stuff. So I became sort of a local expert. Okay, that project shipped in 2013. That was a very long program. But when we introduced it, right, we'd gone through multiple reorgs and name changes and functionality on the way in, but we launched it as a converged wired wireless program. Now, unfortunately, as you all know, there are always competing interests. So we were really keen on converged wired and wireless. The wireless guys not so much. And so we had a good system that was hard to consume. We launched in London in 2013. Does anyone there by any chance? It was a wondrous thing. As part of the launch, our product management group took us out to an Indian restaurant because they were all Indians, and it was Macallan 15s and older for everyone. So this whole program ran through, and we as a group ended up basically taking over the entire campus switching. So we subsumed the 4K role and the 6K role. And for me, this has been the most important part of my career because now my stuff I built helps people do work all over the world, which is a very cool thing. All right, so after that, and this is sort of 2013, 14, having a conversation with my boss about promotions. And the next promotion was distinguished. At the time, so distinguished is a cross-Cisco committee, and the role was really defined as significant external impact, with fellow being external leader. And my boss talked to me, and he actually wasn't my boss, it was my peer I talked to. He did a search of Peter Jones and Cisco and came up with nothing and said, well, what about that? So as a couple of things happened. So I'd been at Cisco Live as the guy at the back of the room like this one. And when the presenter couldn't answer a question, they would like point at me. And my friend used to say, you know, if you can ask Peter something you can't answer, I'll give you $1 Canadian. But so unbeknownst to me, there was sort of this scheme going in the background. And my friend Dave basically attended a presentation I given internally and said, we should do that for Cisco Live. I'm like, yeah, no, I can't do that, right? Not my thing, public speaking. He said, what if we do it together? And so that's how I got basically going into the Cisco Live world. I can tell you it still scares me witless coming up on stage, so I have to think about something else. I have friends who are really comfortable. I'm not one of them. But I do this because it lets me communicate with lots of people. So it's one of the things that sort of I have to get past. So I do what I describe as context sessions. So imagine if you go to the Louvre and all of the paintings on the ground. The content is there, but you can't make sense of it. So one person I was talking to had recently gone to Cisco Live for the first time and booked sessions all day, every day. Right? Put your hand up, whoever that was. Okay. And that doesn't work, right, for a whole lot of reasons, right? Firstly, you miss out a bunch of stuff. Secondly, your brain explodes. So my sessions are always something like a sorbet between courses at a restaurant. It's to clear your head, but it's also to help people understand why we did things. Often tech courses are very much about what, and I want to do the why because if customers understand the why, they're much less frustrated. So I've been giving away chips for years. No one else seems to do it. It's a really interesting thing because it gives you a physical representation of value proposition. And I can say that I helped build it and we can talk about it and they're quite tactile and people fidget with them. I've given away thousands. One of the things I got involved with because as I've talked to some people, Cisco has, let's say 100,000 customers. Number 1 to 1,000 have got lots of people to worry about them. I tend to worry about 1,000 and beyond, which means you can't talk to them directly. So I tend to talk to them via people like Jasper. We have a Cisco Champions program. I want to talk to the people my customers listen to. So it's a little indirect, but it also means I get a much more broad audience because it's not Cisco is saying things that someone you trust heard this and then gave it the version. So one of the things that we tend to do at Cisco Live is this is Kilted Mondays. Everyone shows up in a kilt. I've not yet been brave enough to present in a kilt, though I do show up in the kilt on a regular basis. These are my sessions from Cisco Live in Vegas and Amsterdam. And my friend here went to at least one of these, didn't you? Which one?
Vegas.
Okay, but which of the sessions? You don't know, okay. So again, I'm really trying to explain context. Talking with Giants is probably my favorite session. This started a while ago because I was thinking about general customers and how to get to know Cisco because you really trust people, not companies. So those top customers can speak to anyone they like. I was like, well, what can I do to actually offer that experience broader? So I rang up people I know, which is Kurt Glowheed, who's engineer number 1, and Joel Byrne, who founded TAC. And I said, look, I've got this great idea. What I want to do is basically run like a conversation session about what it was like and why you were there. With the basic outline being like, who are you? You know, what do you do and why? Why did you join? All the way through, why are you still interested? Now, for that one, I actually had to bring him in on WebEx because I couldn't really fly those guys in. But that was wonderful, right? I really enjoyed doing it, and I've got to be able to keep doing it, both with Cisco Fellows and beyond. And the problem I have in this session is I want to interject myself in the conversation, and I really should not. But it's a really fun session to do. No one has to prepare. And what it does is it gives everyone an idea and the motivation of the people behind what they're dealing with. Okay, so about the same time, I also went back to IEEE 802. I'd been there 2003 through 2005, working on a standard called 802.17. It was a great standard, it died. So I went back to work on bridging in 802.1. Who's been working with AVB and TSN? Tell someone. All right, so originally that was home Ethernet, and it was the whole thing about we're going to do time, we're going to do video properly, which evolved into TSN or time-sensitive networking, which is an industrial place. Anyways, because I'm basically a person who deals with forwarding stuff, and so the protocols and the queuing and scheduling was where I should be. But then I got pulled into 802.3. So at that stage, the Cisco people in 802.3 were either very high speed or zero speed PoE. And those of you remember when we first introduced 2.5 and 5 GBST, that was that time. So there was effectively competition running between people associated with my company and associated with Broadcom. Broadcom were 9 months behind. So they did the standard thing and said, why don't we start a standard? That way we both get to start again. And I had this conversation and I went back to office and I explained to my bosses, here's what's happening and here's what we have to do and here's the person we need and here's why it's not me. And they said, thank you very much, very good, go do it anyway. So, and by the way, this is not the original picture. It's a slide that was prepared, but it's a very cool picture, right? And so you see the cable is actually the ether. So I had to go into dot 3, which is fundamentally a bunch of people who do signaling, which is clearly not my thing. I'm a software guy. But what you end up doing is you go, okay, what's the culture? Now, even inside 802.3, between the fiber guys and the optics guys and the copper guys, the culture is different. And this is you see everywhere. So for instance, if I went to Germany and spoke Swahili, that would probably work badly. So you always need to be conscious of who it is you're speaking to. So you got to go and figure it out. And so you start off by watching, see who succeeds and who doesn't, be like the succeeding person and end up influencing. So who's succeeding? It's signal from noise. See a bunch of people who are clearly not thinking about their audience because they're proposing things that won't work. So in this group, you all vote as individuals, and you need 75% of the room to agree to do anything. When's the last time you saw, can I get 75% of this room to agree on lunch? Probably not. How do I get them to agree on a particular specification when 3 other people have their own ideas? So that's sort of the assignment I had, because in this particular program, we had one way of signaling, Broadcom had different, they're effectively the same, but we had to decide who won. And basically the way I approached this was I sort of separated into a couple of groups. There was the group associated with Cisco, the group associated with Broadcom, there was the people who were into cabling, and there was the people who were into standards purity. So I had to figure out a combination between that set of 3 that would actually get me a 75% stable margin. And it was really a question about what story do you tell? For the cabling people, it was like, because they really wanted to sell 6A and there wasn't any. So it was like, you're not going to sell 6A, right? But if you deliver more value on what you sold already, then you'll get the next deal. So that was for CommScope and Pange and these guys, because they'd done really good work, it would be okay. For cheap, bad work, it would not be so. So they will be able to sell hey, last time we did this for you, you got more than you expected, so trust us next time. For the standards purity people, it was like, so let's talk about this, it's going to happen, so where do you want it to happen? And for the competition, it was about, our customers don't care if we deliver the bits high carrier pigeon. The fact that you've got this signaling difference, they don't care. The question becomes is how long is it going to take for standard product? And so for that way, I was able to peel enough people off to go, okay, I can see that, I can change the phi. So then a bunch of the Broadcom line people moved, and we ended up with the first technical meeting. I actually got the baselines adopted and with a Broadcom co-speaker, because I could tell the story that people could hear. That's the set of things I've been involved in. That's what's going on locally. I'm generally in the low-speed stuff, although I've just starting a project to move the Yang modeling for 802.3 into open source. If anyone wants to help with that, I'd love to hear from you. Okay, I became an evangelist, right? And this is not a word I like to use, but it sort of fits. So now I will go anywhere and talk to anyone. You guys are really important, but I will. And so a lot of these people I've met through Cisco Live and the Champions, and I have an opinion, I have a style, and they know I'll speak for myself, so I get invited to a bunch of places. Cables to Clouds. I chair the Ethernet Alliance, and so we have an event called the TF, the Technical Exploration Forum, talking about Ethernet for AI, so I'm recording that one. You guys probably all know David Bumble, so I recorded a short for this, about 3.2 terabit Ethernet, and if you watch it, ignore the fact they actually put the wrong name on it, right? So this link actually has someone else's name on it. I've done a session a couple of times about Ethernet for AI. It's the Cisco use session, which means you don't have to book for it. And again, I'm trying to give context. So this is basically the one I gave in Amsterdam, where it said $525 billion this year, it's now 750. So it's just trying to give it an idea of the scale of what's happening, because all of our normal customers are now in a scarcity environment and almost everything is expensive. So what the hyperscaler is doing is fundamentally changing how you can deploy. And so you've got to figure out ahead of time what you really need. And at this stage, you really say, can I stretch the infrastructure? Because everything is going to cost you a lot. And yesterday, so I got to do a bunch of interviews, and I interviewed Bob Metcalf. Now, I'm not a great interviewer, but I got to do this, so I'm pretty lucky. So you can go take a look at this. This is sort of the same idea as the Talking with Giants. If I can get these people and have a conversation with them like you'd have a coffee or lunch, then everyone else could get to see it. And again, it's the what's the motivations of the people behind this? What do they care about? So he was a whole lot of fun. He's now retired. He did receive a Turing Prize, which is, you know, the highest science prize that you have in America. I also got to interview Gordon, not Gordon Moore. I've forgotten his last name, but he's the guy who was the VP at DEC when they committed to building the VAX for Ethernet when Ethernet didn't exist. He also invented the UART, and so I got to interview some really cool people, and that stuff's all online. So please go take a look at it, and hopefully you like it. So when I was doing the 2.5 and 5 GBC things, one of the things I had to do was I became the chairman of a vendor alliance. What these are is, so ADIT.3 does technical stuff. Other people do marketing stuff. And so we had two alliances, the MBSD Alliance and the MGBSD Alliance, you know, ours and Broadcom's. We were basically out there making the arguments both for why ours was better and why this stuff was important. So again, when this came up, my partner product manager really should have gone and done this job, but he didn't want to do it, so I got to go. So it's like, okay, stand up and run a non-profit, do media analysis, you know, do media talking. And so this was more of stretching my task beyond anything I ever thought. And so that group went for a while, and then it sort of came to the end of its natural life because the standard was done. So not wanting to lose all of the collateral, I parked it in the Ethernet Alliance, which already existed. And so the Ethernet Alliance promotes Ethernet, and I started there a project to promote single pair Ethernet, because single pair Ethernet for industrial is a really interesting thing for me. But a couple of months in, Huawei got itself in trouble. The chairman was a Huawei employee, so he had to step down. And so someone came to me and said, hey, we need like an outbound person. Will you do this? And I'm like, sure, why not? So I get to speak for the entire Ethernet community, which is fun. Now, having interviews at shows when I have to speak about the really high-speed stuff is interesting because sometimes it's a question I can't answer, but then it's well, here's what's happening, I can find you the right person. This is the Ethernet roadmap. There's a bunch of them outside. It's a very cool piece of collateral. I encourage you to take one. And you can also download it, and you can also download all the images to use, and we highly encourage that. So the idea of the roadmap is basically to try and cover the entire market in one fell swoop. I also get to write. Now, some of this writing is by our PR people, and some of it's by myself. But again, I get to go and opine on the entire Ethernet industry, which is sort of cool. It's fun. It means I end up with, there's the Cisco hat, the A hat, and sort of the Peter hat in the middle. And sometimes it gets you in trouble because your product management people get really annoyed when you're doing something that features your competition. And you have to get them to settle down and explain, look, the goal here is to build one big playing field and win inside the playing field. As soon as you split it up, everyone is worse off. If you're going to go do this role, we actually have to do it seriously. You have to be a non-vendor role. So that also means I can talk about things that Cisco wouldn't agree with because I'm speaking for the entire market, which is a lot of fun. Right, so a lot of the stuff I've actually learned on the way through, and this talk is shamelessly reused from one of the ones used at Cisco Live on Careers, extend a little bit. And so a lot of what I talk about these days is soft skills, because without the soft skills, you can't be effective. One of my sons has a touch of autism, and you describe this as got a very powerful motorbike engine and skinny bike tires. So it's a power to the ground question. So you can be as smart as you like, but unless you can communicate well, you're limited. Now, most companies can have a couple of those people and you sort of wall them off. But in general, if you want to get things done, you have to be able to communicate with people who are not like you. So I'm deeply into mentorship and sponsorship. It's people about technology, and you go into a meeting, and it's like, well, what should I say? What's the difference, and why is it important? So mentoring is trying to help you open the door yourself. Sponsorship is opening the door for you when you're not there. I tend to do more mentoring because it's very broad across the set of people. For sponsorship, you really need to be in that, be able to affect the reporting chain. Okay, so 3 of my mentees as examples. They're in Folsom, California, in Colombia, and in San Jose. The ethnicities are Sri Lankan, Colombian, and Persian. So they speak Sinhala, Spanish, and Farsi's native languages, and you can see their roles. None of these people look like me. So someone here was from the Women in Tech scholarshipy thing, and I highly encourage this. But the thing about helping other people, it's about people. And so I tend to go and look for the people who are not in the room. and say, you know, how can I find them? Because what I believe is that it's always easiest for people to hire people that they sound like, feel like, but we really need to do better than this. And so we need to basically go out and look for all the people and make sure we can give them opportunities to make use of their skills. So what can you do about it? You basically have to go and look and think about it. Why? So it's your responsibility. It's your technical responsibility to go and help grow people, professional. And it also, it feeds my soul. It just makes me feel better. All right, branding. So your brand travels with you. It's not what you do for a living. So you got to sort of think about it like, who are you? You know, who is your technical or professional personality? It's different to your home personality. It's certainly different to the way you show up at work. So, you know, what drives you? And that's what I think about with the brand. I tell Bill to write 3 slides. You know, who am I? What do I do? What do I care about? What you're trying to capture is, okay, if you meet someone that's really important for 5 minutes, what is it you're going to tell them? You're not going to tell them you work for this company for so many years. You're not really going to tell them your job title. You're going to tell them something else about you. So you need to be able to capture the brand. I mean, you can do a whole lot of this in lots of different ways. This is what I tend to ask. I do some writing on Substack at the People Switch Diaries, and so all these links are active. So if you go, please take a look and read them, and if you like them, share them. All right, agency. Anyone know what agency is defined as? Right. You can all read this. Agency is really reclaiming power. We can often end up in situations where we think we don't have any choices, and that's often not true. So I really like the one at the top, which is to make choice and act based on your values and desires, right? Can I basically work towards the thing I want to be? Certainly in my case, I've been in places where I felt so stuck I couldn't do anything else. Right? I felt like I was stuck in a job and I couldn't move, I didn't know what to do. So you've heard this, right? So surrendering agency is very easy to do. You keep on the ground and you assume that you can't do anything. But this is not actually true. It's often very easy for us to get into this state, but it's not true. So reclaiming agency takes work, right? You do what's really true. Now, often to do this, you have to go and talk to trusted friends because what you see and what they see are entirely different. And it's like, okay, so if I did this, what could I do next? And you say, well, okay, so let's say this company stops this product. What would I like to do next, right? To the extent of when I'm about to die, what do I want to look back at and have done more of? So reclaiming agency, again, is really it's a personal thing to think about what you want to do, and it empowers you. Communication. So I talked to Cisco Live in Germany at one stage, and I got the message from someone as a comment, great slides, didn't understand a word. So I'm Australian, we tend to speak fast and we close our mouths, and my accent is different. But communication really starts about a talker, a listener, a message, right? We've got a talker over here, and eventually what you're trying to do is get an idea from my mind to your mind. But how do I do that? How do I know that it actually got in? You have to start with empathy because I have to understand you. I have to think about who you are. So I was talking to Sherry earlier, and I said, Sherry, is it really Sherry or is it something else? And she gave me her name, which I can't remember. But she's a Persian, she speaks Farsi, and so she's done the thing that most people have to do, which is anglicise their name because we're too lazy to try hard. And I've done this with a bunch of people. I try and pronounce people's names correctly because even if you get it wrong, you're showing some respect, you're showing that you understand they're different. And it doesn't take very much. So empathy is how you understand people. And I actually got this thing from my kids were in a parent participation school, and so I had to do mandatory parenting classes. And this is basically this is called reflective listening. So when you talk to your kids, when they talk to you, don't just say the words back because they have no idea if you understood. So you say it back in your own words. And that's the way you actually get communication running. Behavior. I've shown a picture to a few people this time. It's the Dilbert where they say $10 a bug. All right, so 4 parts. Define, like what is it you want? So people say they don't like behavior. What do you think it should be? So I was talking to someone about some things Wireshark Foundation could do. And the first thing is like, what is it you want to be? What's the relationship you want? Here's the tricky thing, you actually have to do it. So if there's a rule that says, here's what we should do, and the person who said it doesn't do it themselves, right, you know that they're not very serious. Then you have to see it. So if you say you want certain behavior from your employees, you have to go looking for it. I want you to do really good code reviews. Okay, you have to go notice and see it. You have to reward it. So we often hear that salespeople are coin operated, and that's impolite because all they really are is responding to what rewards you give them. So if you're doing the behavior thing is like, what do I want? Do it yourself, see it when it happens and reward. Plan B. So the project has a backup plan, yes? Okay. Do you guys have a backup plan for your career? Like what happens if it goes wrong? So Silicon Valley, Cisco lays people off almost every year. For a long time, I thought I was going to be the next person. And so I was sort of crippled. And then eventually I got through my thick head that I didn't need to be. And this is an agency thing. You know, plan A is stuff. Okay, something didn't happen. What do you do next, right? If you're building a project, you absolutely have a plan B. Do you have a plan B for your career? Like what happens if your company goes out at work? So in my case, I sort of went through okay, if this happens, what will I do next? I got to the stage where I believed in the next plan, and so then I wasn't worried anymore. So it's a way to regain agency. What's your plan B? Because you know the good plan is my company keeps doing this, I keep enjoying it. The bad plan is my company goes out of work, I get sacked, I lose health insurance, etc., etc., etc. If you have a plan you believe in, a lot of worry goes away. So again, it's reclaiming agency, can and can't control. Well, I think I'm going pretty well on time. All right, so who recognizes this song? Well, okay, you get a chip later on. So this is from David Byrne, Once in a Lifetime. I went looking for a while, so this is David Byrne in 78. And this is him in 2025. Think about the journey that he went on, right? Could he have expected it all from the front? Yeah, not really. Is he doing the same thing? Sort of. Has anyone seen him play recently? It's really quite interesting. And he's got the really bright hair, he's got the white hair, and he's really evolved on the way through. He's changed his career because that's what happened. So the straight road, it's really a very windy road. This one is actually Lombard Street in San Francisco. Has anyone seen it? It's where they used to test the Tesla self-driving for a while because it really doesn't work very well here. And you're better off walking down than walking up because it's really very steep. All right, so I really went, well, that should be bits, from bits to packets. And start with asynchronous bits, right? Hammers the Iron, James West's computer aircraft, and I still needed to look at bits. Thank you, Gemini, for the pictures. We're looking at the bits inside the RS-232, and all she's seeing is bits. Then you go to synchronous bits. So I did E1, T1, I did OC3, I did a bunch of that stuff. And I did it really with Hammers the Iron, James West, and Datacraft, and so this is looking inside the T1 E1 link. And so again, it's bits, but you're starting to actually see good analyzers and end up with packets. And so this is the path that Gerald has helped so many people go on, because the stuff we used to see is god-awful expensive. The fact that you can now do really complex decodes is enormously powerful. Now, personally, I don't do this work anymore, but I use Wireshark at home when I need to try and figure out what's happening on my Wi-Fi. So the fact that this exists has been enormously powerful to our industry. There was a mention someone had gone to take a look at one of the CCNA exams and it was full of Wireshark stuff. And my response is we should figure out a way to get that acknowledged. But I don't know. I mean, do you have any idea how many users are out there? You know, it's got to be in millions. So the entire world uses this tool that came from a good idea. And so I thank you for that. That's my desk. I moved to Gilroy, which is an hour south. That was during COVID. I got to basically bring my desk home. Invest in your workplace. You're going to spend a lot of time there. I actually buy most of this stuff myself because I want to own it. So you spend time at your home, invest, because it makes a huge difference. I travel 10 weeks a year. I work from home except with no people to go and see. So it doesn't really matter. Whatever you need to make your work good, invest. Some people have seen me, what I carry around. I carry around a spare screen. I carry around a Bluetooth keyboard. I carry around an extra webcam because they just make my work easier. So what I do now is I buy the stuff that's going to make my work easier. And that being said, Thank you so much for having me. So I'm around for the rest of the conference. Please come talk. So there's the session feedback. This is my entire contact stuff. I talk pretty much to anyone who reaches out. I can't deal with everyone because there's a lot of people out there. But for me, doing things like this is actually it's career fulfillment, because eventually the goal is to help other people have better careers. Right? I mean, talking about myself is fun, but ultimately the goal is hopefully this gives you guys some idea of context, and hopefully it gives you some ideas for how you can make your own career better.